The day had dawned deceptively calm on Glacier Peak. Soft pink light spilled across the snow-clad slopes as Mara adjusted her pack straps and scanned the horizon. Beside her, Jonas and Pete readied their skis, cracking the ice from their boots. They'd planned this traverse for months, an ambitious route along the craggy ridges that offered breathtaking views and prime powder. The air was crisp and hollow, carrying only the distant call of a raven and the steady whisper of wind through the pines. For the first few hours, the snow was perfect, a luminous field of untouched powder that cushioned each turn and sent white plumes dancing into the air. Mara led the group up a gentle incline, her breath visible in soft clouds. She paused at a narrow saddle to point out the ridge they would crest just before midday, a sharp, serrated line of slate and ice that glinted like glass under the sun. Jonas raised his goggles in admiration, and Pete snapped a quick photograph before they pressed on. By late morning, dark clouds had begun to gather on the western horizon, stretching an ominous band across the sky. The wind picked up, rattling the bare juniper trunks and sending swirling eddies of snow across the trail. Jonas frowned at his map and compass. They disagreed, each needle quivering as if lost in the broad expanse of white. Still, with the summit so close, the three skiers pressed onward, trusting their experience and each other's judgment. But within an hour, the storm closed in with alarming speed. A fine, stinging snow began to fall, blotting out the rocky outcrops and hiding every landmark they'd passed that morning. The peaks vanished, swallowed by a wall of shifting gray. Mara's heart pounded as she shaded her eyes and searched for the cairns they'd erected. Every drift looked the same. Jonas's normally steady voice cracked as he called out, "Did you see where we left the first marker?" Pete's only answer was a breathless exhale, his teeth chattering against the cold. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into them, pushing them off balance. Mara's ski poles rattled against the hard pack as she fought to stay upright. Pete stumbled into a shallow snowbank, and Jonas reached out to steady him. The roar of the storm rose to a howl, and the world shrank to the three of them huddled together. Panic edged into their minds. They were no longer confident explorers but lost against the mountain's merciless will. As the sky darkened and the temperature plummeted, Mara made a decision. "We need shelter," she shouted, though her voice was nearly extinguished by the wind. Together, they spotted a rocky outcrop half buried in snow and staggered toward it, lungs burning. Behind them, the ridge they'd aimed for disappeared entirely. Above, the gathering storm bore down, and somewhere in that white oblivion, hope itself seemed to teeter on the edge of the abyss. The rocky overhang offered only a meager reprieve from the driving gale, but beneath its shadow Mara, Jonas, and Pete huddled together, backs pressed to ice-slick stone. Their breaths came in ragged clouds as fine powder whipped across their faces and stung their exposed skin. Jonas crouched low, peering into the swirling white. "Our tracks are gone," he said, voice hollow. "This storm's erased every landmark." Pete fumbled with his GPS unit, thumbs numb as he tried to coax a signal. The screen flickered, then displayed nothing but an error message. "Dead zone," he muttered, the device's cold plastic a stark reminder that technology could fail them here. Mara tightened her mittens and produced a compass only to watch the needle spin wildly, as though caught in the mountain's magnetic fury. Every direction blurred into the same endless gray. Hypothermia's first curtains crept at the edges of their vision. Mara's fingers tingled numbly around her ski pole, Jonas's shoulders slumped, every muscle heavy with fatigue. Pete's teeth chattered uncontrollably. They traded worried glances, stay put and risk freezing, or attempt to retrace their route and risk plunging off a hidden cornice. The wind's howl drowned out their shouts as they weighed their dwindling options. At Mara's urging, they began to retrace their steps, leaning into the storm, straining to follow the faintest dip in the snow that might mark their earlier path. Each step sank knee-deep, each fallen cairn looked identical to the last. The world had become a featureless dreamscape. Lost in their struggle, they nearly missed it, the flash of movement at the corner of their vision. Mara froze mid-stride as a pale shape darted past a snow-drifted boulder. She blinked against the swirling flakes. "Did you see that?" she cried, but Jonas and Pete shook their heads. In the whiteout's fury, even hope felt like an illusion. Still, Mara's heart pounded with the certainty that something had moved, something alive, just beyond their reach. With no other choice, they pressed on, driven by equal measures of desperation and curiosity, unaware that their true guide was watching from the storm's edge. Cold and disoriented, Mara's shoulders shook as she led Jonas and Pete across the featureless expanse. Every drift looked identical, every gust of wind threatened to knock them off their feet. Jonas's face was streaked with tears of cold and frustration. Pete's lips were blue, his breath coming in rapid, rattling puffs. Then, through the roar of the whiteout, Mara caught it again, a flicker of pale movement at the edge of her vision. She stopped and pointed, heart hammering. Jonas and Pete skidded to her side, peering through the swirling snow. There, no more than 20 yards away, a compact shape with a brush of gleaming white fur paused on a slight rise. It was an Arctic fox, its coat an almost ethereal silver in the diffuse light. The fox regarded them with calm, intelligent amber eyes, ears pricked forward against the wind. Mara swallowed hard, breath catching in her throat. It's guiding us," she whispered. The fox turned and trotted a few paces, then paused to look back. Its body language, tail held high, head tilted, seemed to say, "Follow me." Jonas gasped, and Pete, teeth still chattering, took a step forward. Mara gripped her pole, nodded, and moved after the fox as it melted into the swirling snow. They followed in single file, skis cutting shallow trenches in fresh drifts. The fox led them around a hidden outcrop of rocks, up a gentle incline, and across an ice-crusted creek that would have been impossible to find on their own. At each obstacle the fox paused, sometimes lifting a paw to test depth, other times sniffing the air before crossing safely, inviting them to do the same. The wind slackened slightly along the sheltered game trail the fox had chosen. For the first time since the storm began, Mara felt a spark of hope. She glanced back. Jonas's color had returned to his cheeks, and Pete's eyes shone with renewed determination. Even the storm's howl seemed distant now, muffled by the natural corridor the fox had uncovered. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the fox paused on a small rise. Below, through a thinning veil of snow, they saw the faint glow of lantern light, 2 warm pinpricks against the cold gray. The fox turned to them one last time, its coat streaked with wind-blown ice. Mara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the fox slipped away into the drifting snow, its task complete. Mara, Jonas, and Pete shared a look of awe and gratitude before steering their skis down toward the welcoming glow of the rescue camp. In the fox's wake, each narrowing track in the snow was a testament to a silent guide who knew these mountains far better than any human. By the time Mara, Jonas, and Pete crested the final ridge, the wind had subsided to a cold whisper, and the storm's fury was reduced to drifting flurries. Yet the mountains still held hidden perils. Before them lay a narrow snow bridge spanning a deep crevasse, its surface a smooth, deceptively solid arc of packed powder. One false step would send them plummeting into the yawning gap below. Without hesitation, the Arctic fox trotted ahead to the bridge's lip. It whined softly, then raised a forepaw and gently scratched the snow's surface. Seeing the fox's confidence, Mara set her ski poles firmly, tested the bridge's edge, and began to cross in measured steps. Each footfall echoed in the quiet air. Jonas followed, his breaths short and deliberate. Pete brought up the rear, eyes fixed on the fox's sure path. Midway across, the bridge groaned under their combined weight, snow shifting precariously, but guided by the fox's steady presence, they pressed onward and reached solid ground without incident. Next, the fox led them along the crest of a windswept ridge where cornices, overhanging ledges of wind-blown snow, jut out like trembling daggers. A sudden gust whirled the snow around their faces, and the ridge's fractured cornice groaned ominously. Mara's heart skittered as she spotted a faint crack forming at the cornice's base. Instinctively, the fox veered inward, pattering along a narrow path cut by rockfall, its keen sense pinpointing solid ground. Mara followed, skirted the unstable edge, and helped Jonas and Pete back from the brink. Behind them, the cornice collapsed with a thunderous crack, sending a cascade of powdered ice tumbling down the mountainside. Encouraged, the three skiers pressed on, led by the fox down a sheltered gully where ancient pines braced against the winds. Here, the snow was deeper but softer, cushioning each step. The fox paused only once more, scenting the air, and then bounded forward with renewed urgency. Through the trees, they glimpsed the rescue camp's glow, lanterns hung from snow-laden firs casting golden halos on the drifts. As they emerged into the camp clearing, exhausted yet elated, the fox stood at the edge of the flickering lights. Its fur was flecked with snow, eyes bright with purpose. Mara knelt, tears mixing with melting snow on her cheeks, and whispered, "Thank you," though the fox had already turned and vanished into the silent forest. Behind them, the camp's rescuers rushed forward, warm blankets and steaming mugs in hand. Safe at last, Mara, Jonas, and Pete knew they owed their lives to the silver guide whose uncanny instincts had led them through every frozen peril. Dawn's first rosy glow had barely touched the sky when Mara, Jonas, and Pete stumbled into the rescue camp's clearing. Lanterns hung from stout spruce branches, their golden light pooling on the fresh snow in warm, reassuring circles. Beneath a heavy canvas tent, rescuers moved like shadows, offering thick woolen blankets, steaming mugs of sweet herbal tea, and murmured reassurances that no further danger lay ahead. Mara pressed her face into the soft wool of a blanket, letting its warmth seep into her chilled bones. Jonas sank beside her on a folding stool, his legs still trembling from the crossing of the snow bridge. Pete, cheeks flushed pink, accepted a hot broth that fogged in the cold air. All around, the camp bustled, medics checked frostbitten fingers, dog teams circled expectantly, and radios crackled with final weather updates. Yet for Mara, the world had narrowed to the gentle afterglow of survival and to the silver fox whose tracks led them here. Outside the tent flap, Mara and her friends paused to look back at the ridgeline. There, etched faintly in the crisp snow, were the narrow, weaving tracks of the Arctic fox. For a long moment, the three stood in reverent silence, imagining the fox's pale form slipping away between ancient pines. Then Jonas knelt and scooped a handful of snow, letting it drift through his fingers. "We'll never forget," he said softly. Mara and Pete nodded, voices thick with gratitude. Later, as the camp was packed away and the rescuers prepared to return home, Mara approached the first aid commander. Together they pinned a weatherproof plaque to a sturdy post at the trailhead, an inscription reading. Behind them, the wind whispered through the pines, and for a heartbeat, the camp fell quiet. Then, high among the branches, a solitary fox-shaped silhouette crossed the pale morning sky before disappearing into the mountain's white embrace. Mara, Jonas, and Pete watched until it was gone, hearts full. Though the silver guide would vanish into legend, its courage would forever shine as a beacon for all who dared to follow the mountain's call.